Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning into the Isak Clemens Show. Today is Monday, January 12th. This is episode number 7. If you'd like to contact the show, you may do so by emailing us at the isacclemensshow@gmail.com. It's the same spelling as the podcast itself. We'd appreciate if you give the show a follow in the Rumble app and sign up for the notifications in the Rumble app also so you don't miss a show. Today we're going to be talking about affordable housing in Teton Valley, what this means, what the government and nonprofit involvement and role is locally. It's a very big topic. It seems to find its way into many conversations locally and in the papers and social media. This might turn into a regular topic of discussion going into the future. Today I'm joined by Troy Bootsloff. Troy has spent his life in city government, both here in Teton Valley and other places around the country. I'll let Troy expand upon his background and professional resume. Troy, thank you for joining us today. Can you share with us and the audience a bit of your background and what your involvement locally has been with the affordable housing stuff?
Sure, Anthony. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I spent better part of 30 years in local government, all in California, until I relocated here to retire in 2020. I've gone through the ranks. I basically have worked my entire career in the city manager's office, which is kind of, for those who don't know, local government, the control center of government. That's where city manager and his staff basically work for the city council to implement city policy and basically carry out the day-to-day operations of city government. I've served in 6 different cities in Southern California, from Indian Wells to Palm Springs to Placentia, which is in Orange County, Azusa, which is in LA County. And as I said, I retired in 2018, moved out here where we had some property in Ashton, which we were going to build upon. And we started to look for a place to kind of use it as our hub to build that property. And so we chose a place in Teutonia. And I didn't have any intention of going back into local government, but in 2021, the mayor of Victor reached out to me. They had just lost their city manager or city administrator, and he asked if I would come in and kind of serve in an interim position until they could recruit a replacement to their city administrator. What I thought was going to be a 90-day experiment turned out to be a year and a couple months, and I had to train my successor, who's now the city administrator of Victor, and they were so happy with my experience and some of the things I did for the city of Victor during my time as city administrator. The mayor and my replacement, my mentee, asked if I'd stay on and basically continue to work for them. So I currently consult to the city of Victor. I serve as a special and capital projects manager. So I've done a lot of capital projects. I helped the city build a new maintenance facility. I did the move into the U.S. Bank building in Victor for City Hall, and I've been successful in gaining about, I think to date, it's about $3.5, maybe $4 million in grant money from different state and federal agencies to help the city with projects, everything from roads to riverbank reconstruction to capital projects in the city. And so not only do I do that, but I also serve as the executive director of the Victor Urban Renewal Agency, which is basically an economic development engine that helps eliminate blight, basically helps with infrastructure improvements that are needed throughout the city. And then, as this program is all about affordable housing, I was appointed to the Teton County Joint Housing Authority, which was its original name, by the city of Teutonia back in 2020. And I just finished a 5-year term with the housing authority serving the city of Teutonia. And I decided 5 years was enough. So I stepped down, and now I let others fill the void. So,
Wow. So you thought you were going to retire, and it sounds like you probably work 6 times as hard in retirement as you did maybe as a city employee in Cali.
it's interesting. I actually served 2 other cities too in Idaho. I've done about a year and a half of work as an advisor to the mayor of Bellevue, Idaho, up in Blaine County, and through my work there, the mayor of the city of Cary, which is also in Blaine County, asked if I would help her and deal with a lot of problems that the city was having. They're very remote, on the edges of the Craters of the Moon National Park or National Monument, I guess it is, and don't have a lot of employees, but they're a full service city. They have water, wastewater, public works, takes a lot of effort, and if you don't have a lot of employees to do it, you can have a lot of problems. So I currently still work for the city of Cary, but as you said, yeah, it feels like in retirement, I'm working harder than I was sometimes than when I was actually working, 15, 16-hour days as a city manager in California.
Right. Once you have a skill set and people find out about it, you find out how many friends you have. Or I often tease people about that. I'm a welder by trade, and I said I didn't realize I had so many friends until I learned how to weld. And
Exactly.
people come out of the woodwork. I'm sure it's no different. So, can you touched on this a little bit already? Can you just kind of give us an overview? I mean, I have in my mind some notion about affordable housing, but what's reality? Teton Valley, 2026 now. What where does the government fit into this? What nonprofits are involved? Like, who are the players? And kind of paint that out for us.
Well, it really starts at the local level with the cities. The cities play a significant role not only in the land use area of making regulations and rules governing development um, simple and easy enough for people to build housing. Uh, as a lot of us, I think, have found out, there's been quite a bit of changes in how these local agencies have dealt with the rules and regulations governing construction here in Teton Valley. Some agencies, like the county, have gotten tougher. They almost have policies that make it very difficult to build in the county. And some cities have made it equally as tough as well. And that really controls how much housing can be developed. The Teton Housing Authority, as it's known now, was formed in really 2018. It wasn't. It was made up of electeds back then, the mayors of each of the three cities and the county commission chair. Uh, they decided that they needed to approach housing from a holistic level where everybody was working on it instead of just trying to let each city deal with it on its own, which makes a lot of sense because housing is a regional issue. It's not just isolated to Victor or Teutonia or Driggs. What the county also thought is that housing should be placed in the urban cores, which makes sense as well because that's where you have the services, that's where your transportation network is. So to put a lot of developments in the county where it's not tied to either city core or transportation doesn't make a lot of sense either. So the housing authority evolved and basically became this really commission of citizens who represented each of the cities to provide insight and recommendations to not only the members of the housing authority, which were the three cities in the county, but also tried to come up with their own set of policies and suggestions on how Teton Valley can address the systematic housing problem that we were having in the early part of 2020 to present day. And it's been somewhat of a challenge, but we did do a lot of work initially on trying to understand the need. One of the biggest reports that came out of the early workings of the housing authority was the 2022 housing needs study. That particular document found what the deficits were and how we needed to make up for some of the housing that we lacked. As you can imagine, this is a very high cost area.
Mm-hmm.
Many of the mountain resort communities in the Rocky Mountain West are high cost cities. And in order to be able to afford the housing, you have to make a pretty high living wage to do that. When it comes to service workers and people who work in various trades, they're not necessarily making enough money on an hourly basis or even on a salaried basis to afford the cost of housing. And because we are a destination area where people want to buy a second or third home and they want to come here on occasion, but not necessarily live here full time, that takes up a lot of the available housing and then drives the cost even higher. So we have seen a tremendous escalation in the price of housing. I bought my property in 2020 for just under $300,000. That was a 1 acre with a manufactured house on it. It was just recently appraised because I took out a home equity line of credit on it for over $600,000.
Wow.
So just do the math.
Yeah.
I mean, basically a doubling of the cost of the property in the home in really 4 years' time.
Right.
And that's really part of the problem here is that we've seen such a escalation in the cost of housing. I mean, right now, a single family home in Teton Valley is going at about $1 million.
Wow.
So when you look at the numbers, who can afford $1 million mortgage? Not a lot of people.
Right. You're not flipping burgers in Teton County and swinging that kind of mortgage. So now with the housing authority, where's the push? Like, what is their target occupant for the housing? And are they? It sounds like they're serving more as like a guidance or steering committee rather than being in the business of building homes. Or are they taking part in construction here? Because I think of housing authorities in big cities where I used to live and work, and like it's its own machine. They're building the buildings, they're taking care of all the day to day maintenance, et cetera. Like, what are we doing locally here?
Well, initially, the housing authority was a facilitator, and we tried to broker deals with some of the local agencies here, cities, for property that they may have had in their possession that we could then use to bring in developers. So our first foray into this was back in 2023. County had some excess land. This was the old County Public Works yard in Driggs that they wanted to basically turn into affordable or workforce housing. And the city of Victor had acreage over at Sherman Park, which it wanted to potentially look at using for workforce housing. So the Housing Authority put out a request for qualifications to the development world and basically advertised these parcels. And two developers came forward. Both were selected, one for the Front Street property in Driggs, that was Northwest Realty. And for the Sherman Park project, that one was awarded to the Snavely Group, which is out of Cleveland. So those two projects were basically government property that was basically going to be leased or sold to the developer to build upon. That's been predominantly the approach the housing authority's been going with because, frankly, the housing authority has no money.
Right.
Housing authority is a organization on paper, has the authority under state statute to issue bonds, but doesn't have a dedicated funding stream to pay back those bonds or do anything else. We do have some revenue from Thomas Toll, who has been very generous in providing the housing authority with money to pay for the executive director's salary, and he just renewed that pledge to pay for the executive director's salary. But that's only about $120,000 a year. Certainly not enough to build housing.
Right. That's just going to a salary.
It's just going to operations.
Yeah.
Each of the cities in the county have been contributing some money annually. It's not a lot, $15,000 per city, except for Tetonia. Tetonia, again, not a very rich community, doesn't have a lot of excess revenue. So they've been paying maybe $2,500, $3,000 at most. And then the county this year decided not to pay anything to the housing authority simply because they didn't have the funds for themselves. And they had to not only cut out the housing authority, but a lot of the social service and nonprofits
Right.
in the valley. So when you only have maybe, let's say, an operating budget of $300,000,
Right.
you can't do a lot with that to do housing. So until a dedicated funding source is identified and can be used to issue bonds or to pay for housing development, the housing authority is going to be really restricted to working out deals with local governments who have excess property, who are willing to lease or sell that property to the development community, and then we can facilitate a competitive procurement process to try to get a developer to come in and build those units. It's way behind where we should be at this time. I mentioned to you the needs assessment. The needs assessment basically identified that by 2027, we needed to have 1,580 affordable housing units.
What are we at now?
Well, by count, I think we're maybe just shy of physical units, 34, in the queue for development. We have 90 at Sherman Park, of which 55 are going to be set aside for workforce housing. We have 28 scheduled for the Front Street property that I mentioned earlier, but that has yet to be even, ground hasn't even been broken on that. And then we have a new project that the Housing Authority has been working on for the better part of the last 2 years, and that's property the Housing Authority acquired from the Conservancy, which is also on Front Street, and that's called Signal West, and that's still in conceptual design. And the Housing Authority is talking about maybe taking on that as a build project, where the Housing Authority would build the project. I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense for the Housing Authority to do that, only because, again, we don't have the revenue. So we would have to essentially find ways to pay for that. Right now, the current thinking is we can get foundations or very generous individuals who reside here in Teton Valley to pony up the necessary funds to build that. But we're talking probably close to a $6 to $7 million funding gap that needs to be made up. I mean, sure, we can sell the units, but that only generates so much money. You still have to have enough money to pay for the project. So,
My quick math is you're 1,100 units behind, right?
oh yeah,
Yeah,
easily,
yeah.
and the need just continues to grow. I mean, obviously, um, we will have more need because of businesses that come into the valley, um, just based on growth in population. So by 2030, we're supposed to have between 1720 and 2590 units set
Wow.
aside. So, and that's just for that's the general need of housing, for workforce or below market target, which is a 60% of the area median income. That's about 1,000 to 1,500 units that have to be built by 2030, and that's only 40 years away.
So who's the target occupant for these affordable housing complexes that are being built? I know there's the essential worker side, so your police, fire, hospital staff, the things, the county employees, city employees, etc. Is it targeted towards them, or is it targeted towards the general public? Like, Ski Bum wants to come plop down and live in Driggs.
What your listeners can't see is this rainbow chart I'm showing
It's
you. Yeah,
beautiful.
it is beautiful. This is our spectrum of housing needs, and it's basically from the very low income
Okay.
all the way to 120 of area median income. The sweet spot is for, let's just say, for the workforce between 80 and 120. Anything below 80, we start to get into the people who are just barely making it by in Teton County based upon their job or their income levels. Um, we try to address everything because the need is multifaceted and broad. But for the workforce, the area that we're trying to target is 80 to 120% of the area median income. To just let kind of what we're
Yeah.
talking
What does that
about.
number look like?
That's $78,000 to $146,000 annually.
Okay.
So
A big range.
it is. It is a big range. But when you think about what the average person here in Teton Valley is making in the county, the average annual salary in the county is 79,000, which translates to $38 an hour. For the general workforce, all occupations, based upon Bureau of Land Statistics data for the first quarter of 2025, the average weekly wage in the county was $991, which equates to $24.78. To be able to buy the median home price in Teton County, based on 2025 numbers, the median home price is $799,000. That would require annual salary of, does it say? Basically, you would have to make $27.83 an hour.
Gotcha. So the median income here ain't cutting it for the median home, right? That's the takeaway. What's what's the occupancy rate of these affordable housing projects that have been completed? Are they filled, or are they?
The one that we have completed, which is Depot Square, which is off of Bates, across from Kaufman Tire, is, to the best of my understanding, full up. We did have some issues getting people from Teton Valley to qualify because the income requirements, because they used low income tax credits, which is a way for developers to basically be able to finance a project and get some tax credits. Because they're using these federal or state tax credit dollars, they have to set aside so many units for like the 30 to 50% income range on the AMI scale. It was very hard to find anybody
Right.
who was willing to make application to live there. In fact, people from Rexburg ended up moving into some of those units just because they met the income eligibility requirements, and they were mainly seniors or seniors who were also veterans who obviously met the qualifications of income. But because those kind of projects have such strict requirements for who can live there based on income, those are hard projects to satisfy in this area because, again, in order to live here, you have to make a pretty sizable
Right. So if you were
annual
already
income.
here, you presumably had some source of income and you're overqualified essentially to live in these things. I mean, you hear the oft trotted out line here of these developers are just raping the land and getting rich. With what you know behind the scenes with this stuff, these developers that are building like Sherman Park, the Depot Square, maybe the Larkspur one, I don't know that was an affordable housing project, but are these developers really making out on this, or is this like a side pursuit for them and philanthropy type work? Like, are they developing in Park City and they're like, hey, we'll give back to a community and build here? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, it really is a passion of caring for our community. Very few of these affordable housing developers actually make significant money. That's why they require either direct donation of the land, like in the Sherman Park case, the city of Victor is leasing the developer the land for 99 years
Gotcha. Right.
at $1 a year.
Right.
So
We won't have to worry about the end of that lease.
exactly. Um, for the Front Street property, Signal West, the housing authority ponied up, was it, I believe, 300 and some odd $1,000 to buy that 1.1 acre from them. So whether or not we end up giving it to the developer to use that kind of as the base for them to be able to use it, or lease it to them like we did in Victor for the Sherman Park project, I don't know. That decision hasn't been made, but it definitely is not something that builders generally do because it makes money for them.
Right.
End up paying a lot out of their own pocket, or they have to go and get assistance either from state or federal sources. So for both Sherman Park and the Front Street project in Driggs, which is on the old county public works yard, both of those projects received $5 million from the state of Idaho. It's former ARPA money that was not spent, and the state basically allocated it to them to build workforce housing. So for the Sherman Park project, 55 of those 90 units are going to be dedicated for workforce housing. They have to meet a certain AMI to be able to qualify to live there, and they will also have to prove that they actually work in Teton Valley. So you can't predominantly work in Jackson
Oh,
and basically get into Sherman Park. If there's no qualified people from Teton Valley looking for housing, then those individuals might be considered. But the primary goal here is to house people from Teton Valley because,
what's the
frankly,
point?
frankly,
Yeah.
we need housing here. It makes no sense to send our workforce over to Jackson each and every day. I mean, based
And
on
house them here at our expense.
based on
Right.
our estimates or the housing authority's estimates, 35% of our residents are going over the pass each and every day to work in Jackson. I understand that they pay a lot better over in Jackson. We need to have people able to live here because our businesses require that. I, I'm fond of telling this story. I mean, I've met numerous times with Robert Brolam from Brolam's. He is spending over $100,000 a year to import employees from Rexburg to work our Brolams here in the valley.
Wow. And is that because they have to, or they're able to import like college kids that'll take a lower wage, or?
Part of that's true, but also the cost of housing is very
Right.
tough.
Right. How can you bag groceries and buy an $800,000 house here?
You can't.
Right.
It's just, I mean, the average monthly rent here in Teton Valley for a two-bedroom apartment is $1,500 a month.
Right.
So how on a, let's say, $10 an hour wage
Yep.
would you be able to do that? You can't. So that's where Robert has to essentially import his workforce into Teton Valley. Many other businesses in the valley also have labor shortages and are constantly having to replace people because people come, they figure out it's too expensive, they leave, or they have to drive in from Rexburg or other locations, and they get tired of the commute, and it gets costly from a
Right.
gas and
Dangerous.
vehicle maintenance standpoint, and they leave as well. So if we don't have workforce housing in Teton Valley, my fear is a lot of our businesses will end up having to shutter their doors and leave. And we don't want that because obviously they generate not only income for the cities, which we use then for the services we provide our community, but for those who actually work there, that's their income as well. So we have to be very careful. So that's why, to me, we need to make sure that we provide enough housing for the workforce that works our businesses, so we're not essentially becoming a ghost town of just a lot of shuttered businesses and people who can afford to live here living here.
Right. I had a conversation with someone. They were in Jackson, and they were somehow involved with Jackson's housing plight over there. And I said, if you're a business owner, this is going to be a very unpopular take, perhaps, but I said, if you're a business owner, especially a new business, you say, hey, I want to open a pizza shop. Well, unless it's just going to be you and your family running the pizza shop, you should have a business plan for how you're going to staff the pizza shop. And paying people $9 an hour to make pizzas, they're not going to be able to live here. We don't have this robust apartment rental market like maybe Idaho Falls and Rexburg do. And the person just kind of looked at me, well, I think they should be able to afford to live here. I said, well, we can fix that. And they said, well, how? And I said, we'll just charge $60 for a pizza. And they kind of looked at me and I said, right, no one's going to pay $60 for a pizza. The pizza shop goes out of business. They said, this place is going through the growing pains right now, in my opinion, of how do we make the leap? And then, from a agricultural base, slash tourism to predominantly tourism, and the agriculture is still here, but I think it's waning for any number of reasons. The land underneath us is worth so much. I understand when the farmers sell their property, like, how could you say no to the dollar amounts? You can either grow rocks and potatoes for a living, or you can sell your property and retire nicely and move on. But I just sometimes I wonder, like, what was the business calculus with opening these businesses? And then I look at, businesses generate taxes more than a residential property if they're a successful business. And um, you know, right now the way our zoning is set up, my quick look at a map is Teton County is zoned like 99% for residential or agriculture and like 1% for business. And I don't see how we change that, because if you said, hey, I mean, they just did a rezone of a, industrial area south of Driggs there, and it was, the sky was falling. I don't see how we add more business here to bring in revenue. And it's not like we don't need the business here, because we're all driving to Rexburg and Idaho Falls to use these
Sure.
things. Um, you go to Costco or Sam's Club or Home Depot, you see, it's hard to not see someone from Teton County there that you know. But what do you think about the zoning component of this? Like, to me, that's a problem that we don't have zoning set aside to let business grow.
Well, as I said early on, that's somewhat intentional. The county land use code basically forces development into the city centers. They want the cities to take on the businesses, the residential, especially the multifamily, and leave the county essentially ag or single family subdivisions. Uh, I'm not necessarily overly opposed to that, because I think because of the infrastructure needs and the fact that city cores tend to help the population not only with service availability but also transportation, from a strategy standpoint, that makes a lot of sense. But if you don't have cities allowing for rezones or for utilization of their vacant property for commercial industrial uses, then we don't grow and we don't generate additional revenue for our cities, because bringing in new businesses or new industrial. When I say industrial, I'm mainly talking about light manufacturing
Right.
uses.
We're not talking about building a steel mill here.
Right, exactly. We're never going to see that. But that is something that we need to, I think, work harder on. But the overall regulatory scheme in Teton Valley is part of the problem for housing. Not only do you have the problem with zoning issues, but then you get into the real meat of the issue, and that is you just got a lot of people here who don't want to see any of these uses, because they came from a metropolitan area where these uses were always considered to be eyesores, or they just take away from the ambiance of the uh, region. And I just think that's a little bit of a short-sighted um, philosophy, because ultimately, in order for our region to be successful, we need a mix of uses. We need to have not only the residential uses for our people who want to live here, but we have to have commercial industrial uses so that people have jobs and those businesses can generate revenue that go to support the services that we provide our
Right.
residents.
Yeah, I
And
mean, you look at like, there's 15 different microbreweries of some kind here. I'm, exaggerating that number, but I look at their footprint. It's a pretty quiet business. It's small. They employ a few people, and I got to imagine they're making product. I see their stuff 500 miles away from here. But it seems anytime that someone pitches an idea, people are out with the torches and the pitchforks. And, I went to that town hall meeting of sorts a couple months ago where they want to, here in Teutonia, they want to add on and they've annexed property and some's already in the city limits. And I mean, the people were just beside themselves about, there was talk like, phase 3 or 4 of this project, build out along the highway and sort of continue Main Street USA. And there were business owners there that were just livid about that idea. Maybe livid's a bit of a stretch, but they were upset about the thought of it growing. And we want it to grow from here. And it just, I don't know how you it. And I agree, this place has this chronic problem with I built a house or I opened a business, and then they want to kick the ladder out from underneath them after they achieve their success. And yeah, that's not a way to grow. I mean, you can talk about gatekeeping. This place has got to be one of the nastiest gatekeeping places. I mean, we have a beautiful view where we're sitting here recording this, and just to the east of us, that's county property. And I know someday that that's probably going to be developed. Maybe it won't. I mean, I'd be fine either way, but um, you can't stop people from developing their property. I mean, if they own the property, they own the property. And I was, I've talked to people. I'm like, oh, I can't believe you're in favor of development. I said, I'm not necessarily pro development. I like the views and the tranquility, if you will, of Teton County. And I think we kind of get our perception gets skewed because we all drive the highway corridor, right? And the highway corridor is pretty filled. You go a mile either direction of the highway, it's still pretty empty out there.
much
And
ag, yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of open land out there or whatever. So I I just don't, I'm a private property rights believer, and I don't see how you can tell someone they can't do something with their property. And you know, um, the regulatory stuff kills me. I remember, I was involved with the wildlife stuff and trying to rein that in and at least make it fair and level the playing field and, root out some of the conflicts within it. But, one of the former commissioners and a commissioner candidate both stood up at, I believe, some kind of open mic session and said, oh, what's the big deal if it's another $10,000 for a bunch of animal studies? If you're already building a house, who cares? And I'm like, yeah, but it's $10,000 here, it's five here, it's seven there. Like that adds up, and pretty soon there's the cost of your kitchen and your bathrooms in a new home. So if you're talking about a family that wants to buy an acre and a half of property or whatever and build a home, those things tack on a lot of costs to the, you're suddenly making what was reasonable completely unaffordable just for paperwork.
Oh yeah, the cost of development is just outrageous. I mean, you look at the cities and the county and the fees that they charge and the development impact fees that they charge. It's really a barrier for a lot of developers, even individual builders who want to build, a single family home. Um, if we were to make certain changes like on parking for multifamily projects, we were able to reduce some of the costs related to that, that would be a great way of encouraging more developers to build multifamily units. For example, it's the cost per unit right now is estimated at $25,000 to $65,000 to meet the parking standards of most of the cities. So if that were somehow reduced or they were given more flexibility on parking for like on-street parking or other ways to provide parking for the residents and their guests, that would reduce the overall cost of a house. Effective January 1st of this year, the city of Driggs has implemented a new cost for water sewer connection. Uh, my understanding is it's now $35,000 to connect a single family home to the sewer system in Driggs.
Just for the privilege of hooking into the system.
Exactly. And that's for a single family residence. So imagine a multifamily
Yikes.
residence
Right.
or complex. It's going to really create, I think, some issues for a lot of developers who may want to build here, or even some individuals who want to build on property that they've owned for a number of years, but just haven't been able to afford to build.
Is that price being set that so high to be punitive and a deterrent to people to build, or is that a panic reaction to the looming sewer, water treatment plant facility, a way to offset or both?
I think it could be a combination of the two. I certainly know that fees can be used to deter development if you price it so much.
Gatekeeping.
Exactly. People are not going to go forward with their project. And that is problematic. And I think we need to really take a look at that to determine if we are precluding a lot of people from being able to develop. Um, the issue with affordable housing is a lot of these developers will come in and they'll say, "Yeah, we'll build a multifamily, affordable, or workforce housing project, but you're going to need to waive some of the fees that you charge." Under state law, if we waive those impact fees from their project, general fund of the city has to pay for it.
Oh,
So it's not like we can just say with a magic wand, those fees go away. We actually, the taxpayers of that city, are picking up the cost of that. So it's really a double-edged sword. Yes, the developers would like to pay less because essentially, in order to build affordable housing, you have to um, take less money. You're going to make less profit.
right.
And so, in order to make up for that gap, they need to get either some assistance in the form of land dedication or fee reduction, or go out and get grants or loans from the federal government through USDA. Again, those come with strings, and anytime there's a string attached, it's just another way that the developer is going to say that doesn't make sense. I can't afford to do that. So there are things that government can do to help make it easier for developers to want to build affordable housing. And we just need to figure out what that sweet spot is so that we're able to incentivize more developers to want to come to Teton Valley and build affordable housing because traditionally developers want to make money and they're not just going to build a project that they don't make any money on.
Right. I mean, you got to pay your workers, you got to pay for the materials, the permitting, all this
Exactly.
other stuff.
And they have shareholders and people who want to see a rate of return on a project. They're not likely to want to see zero on the balance sheet.
Right. I have a soft spot for the essential, the true essential workers, the hospital workers, your, public service types, police, fire, people that work for the county, the road and bridge people, all that. Um, I, I do struggle though with the idea that there should be public dollars or tax money going to I come here, I want to open a restaurant, say, and I'm like, oh, now the government has to provide housing for my restaurant workers. I don't agree with that, and like I think there's quite a few people who don't agree with subsidizing or offsetting that stuff. What's what's kind of the local take on that, or what's your opinion about that? Like, what have they done anything for these essential workers? I know the hospital has their own housing system, sort of in house, and I believe the sheriff's office has some kind of stipend for housing, but what's sort of the housing authorities' take on that, or your take if you don't want to speak on their behalf?
Well, we've examined it from the housing authority standpoint, but I'll give you my take on it. I think for essential workers, law enforcement, fire protection, um, snowplow operators,
Yeah.
hospital workers, we definitely need to do something, and we have been doing something, or the organizations they work for have been doing something. You may have recently seen in Driggs at the ITD um, headquarters there off of Highway 33. They put a number of manufactured housing
Yes.
units there. That was done specifically to house the local Idaho State Police officer because he was renting and didn't have a permanent residence, and to have snowplow operators here in the valley so that we didn't have to worry about them able to get to the valley
Right.
in the event of a snowstorm. The hospital definitely is housing a number of their medical staff, and I think they're looking at expanding that program. The school districts talked about doing something on their property to provide for housing because, again, teachers and administrators that don't live here in the valley have to commute in, and if we ever again have a shutdown of the highways leading in and out of the valley, that could be a problem. So I think there is a need for that, and specifically for the Front Street property in Driggs, the county is getting an allocation of 3 units. that they can use to house county employees who don't live in the valley, which I think is great. The city of Victor has a right of first refusal on 5 units for its workforce if it needs to use it at the Sherman Park project. The city of Victor actually has its own housing over at the old train depot off of Highway 31. There's 6 units there, and right now there are one employee who's living there, but at the height of it, we had 3 employees who were living there. The units that are not being lived in by city employees are being used by people who need housing. So I think there is a definite need for housing essential workers. And I think what we're doing, both in cities that are here locally and what the housing authority is trying to do, I think are trying to make up for some of that shortage. Should housing be provided to private businesses? Not in my view. I mean, that's something a private business needs to consider.
Part of the business plan.
Right. And I know, for example, Robert Brolam was looking at using the property they bought for the Brolam store in Victor, which is right off Center Street, just to the east of Highway 33. He was thinking that maybe, since he's not going to use it for a store now, maybe he could get into the building community and build some housing there for his workforce, especially if he was going to open a second store in Victor. He would either be doubling his transportation costs from Rexburg to haul the workforce in, or he could look at building some workforce housing for his own company and basically put people there. I think that's where a lot of private businesses may have to go, is that they, especially if they have a lot of employees, that's what MD is looking at doing. MD is looking at putting units on their vast acreage to basically accommodate their not only year-round workforce, but their seasonal workforce as well. So I think some of the more forward-thinking business owners in the valley are probably thinking of that, is that they're going to have to provide some accommodation for their workforce if they want to have a workforce. So I think I'll leave that to the private sector to basically deal with.
Right, I think it's a great idea. Now the MD one, they made a pitch for that last year, the year before. Didn't that get shot down, or are they?
I think they're still refining it. They're still
Okay.
trying to come back with some sort of plan. They're going to have to amend the county code to allow for it, but I think it makes sense for somebody like that to have
Right.
some level of housing on their unutilized property so that they can basically have the people that they need, because obviously they're not paying a very high work wage. They're probably at the very near minimum wage.
Sure.
And so in order to bring in the people to work those jobs, they're going to have to provide some form of housing, because people are not going to necessarily commute from Rexburg or St. Anthony for a minimum wage job.
Right. And I hear stories about people, that work for the municipal services here driving from Rexburg, Idaho Falls. I know of one case where they're driving from Blackfoot. Maybe some of these cases are voluntary. They don't want to live here for any number of reasons, but that is a problem, especially with our unique weather situation here for 6-7 months of the year, where, although not this year, you can't get in or out of the valley. There was, this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but I remember, with the sheriff's office, there was a talk about like, oh, we're building this housing complex. We could put 2 or 3 deputies in here, below market rate, blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, police officers typically don't want to live in a, that type of housing arrangement. I mean, see what's going on around the country now. They want to have a bit of a buffer, if you will, or, even a modest piece of land to kind of, for security reasons. They don't want to live like that. So sometimes I feel like there's a disconnect with like, hey, we want to do this. And it's like, well, your target audience, I don't know, wants to live in that particular situation there. I also look at, I hear affordability, affordable housing. I feel like it's very subjective too. Like what's affordable to one person isn't affordable to another person. I think that kind of muddles things a little bit with the conversation, but what's on the docket, you think, for the next year with affordable housing here? I mean, you mentioned some of these projects, but um,
Well, Sherman Park has already started. They've already gone vertical. So that will probably be completed in 2027. Front Street, they're still going through the entitlement process with the city of Driggs. They need to break ground in order to essentially use that $5 million that was awarded to them by the state of Idaho by May of this year. If they do not, that could be problematic, and it might actually doom that project. The Signal West project, it's also on Front Street. They're still in the conceptual design phase. They're trying to figure out how many units. They're talking about maybe upwards of 14 or 16 townhomes on this 1.1 acre parcel. But now it's how is it going to be paid for? So we don't have a revenue source for the housing authority. I don't know how they're going to resolve for that. I think it's wishful thinking to think that the private community and foundations are going to pay upwards of $5 or $6 million to bridge.
Right. How do you just eat the cost of the materials and the
Can't.
labor with that?
You have to pay a contractor, and a contractor's not going to work for free. So
Right.
I had proposed to Commissioner James a real estate transfer tax. We had it in California. It didn't generate a lot of income for the city, but in some cities or some states, it generates a considerable amount of income for the local agencies. It's already implemented in 36 states across the country. None of the states surrounding us have it for obvious reasons. A lot of our adjoining neighboring states don't like taxes, much like we don't like taxes here in Idaho. But how it works is basically it's upwards of a 1% transaction tax on the sale of real estate. It's paid for between the buyer and seller, or it's negotiated. They determine who pays for it. But based upon real estate activity in 2025, it is estimated that this 1% real estate transfer tax would generate to the county $4.3 million.
Wow.
Not a small number.
And that money would go towards.
Well, the way we talked about how we'd use this, and we did have a meeting with Senator Mark Harris, who seems to be interested in seeing this potentially turn into some legislation. It was tried back in Idaho in 2006. It just got nowhere. The real estate industry killed it from the get-go. But Mark Harris has met with members of the county commission and myself and the Housing Authority executive director, and he seems open to the idea of sponsoring this legislation in the coming legislative cycle. So we'll see if it actually gets turned into legislation, and then it has to, of course, go through the hearings and ultimately be approved by the House and the Senate, and ultimately signed by the governor. But the way it's being worked out is that the county, if they went forward with this, and it would require a vote of the people. Right now, the legislation that was previously proposed in 2026 required a supermajority, 66.6%. We're trying to lower that threshold to 60. Still pretty high bar to get approved,
Right.
but at least it gives people some comfort that 60% of the electorate approved it. We also are going to submit, if it is approved and allowed to be submitted to the voters for consideration, the county will have to set what the uses are for voter approval. So the county could decide we're going to assign 30% to the sheriff's department for sheriff support, 30% to the fire district, or 20% to the housing authority.
Right.
It can be any number of things. It's very similar to how the local options tax is designed.
That the cities have.
Cities are allowed to, with again 60% of the vote, to put forward a tax on lodging, the sales of alcohol, other things, and they have to also designate how that money is going to be utilized in the question that's presented to the voters. So the voters have a say on how that money is to be allocated. So, for example, in Victor, we recently did an extension. We didn't add anything new to the eligible uses. The eligible uses are still public safety, roads, parks, and basically things to support the infrastructure of the community, which I think is perfectly justified because the voters should decide how those dollars are going to be utilized in their community. So if we can do something similar with this real estate transfer tax, where the voters of Teton County are able to say these are the uses that we're going to authorize this money to be collected, then the county has to use it for those uses. So if housing can be part of that, then that could potentially be a funding source that could be used not only to do our own housing in Teton County, but also to go out and issue bonds, because then we would have a dedicated funding source to basically repay those bonds.
Gotcha. And all three of the incorporated cities have that local option tax now, right? Yeah.
Estonia just recently got theirs approved.
Now, sometimes I look at these affordable housing projects and I feel like we're building modern day coal towns where these people get in, they're kind of they qualify to live there because they make a certain salary. Are they kind of locked in? Like, say you can't make more than $80,000 a year. You qualify, you get in, you're occupying the space. If you get a raise or you change jobs and you're suddenly making 90 or $100,000 a year, do you lose your housing then? Or
Well, there is a requalification process that happens annually for any of these projects that have a AMI structure associated with it, because we don't want somebody, as you said, making $100,000, but they got in there when they were making $75,000. We
right,
want to make those units available for the people who actually make that $75,000. So that has yet it's been tried and proven in a lot of other areas in the United States. We just haven't had a chance to do it yet. The housing authority is talking to the city of Driggs and to Teton County, Wyoming, of all places, to kind of have some sort of program in place where they can make sure that people meet the necessary qualifications to reside in the unit that they've been put in, because we don't want somebody to basically change
right. You
jobs.
get in there when you're 24 and you're 64 now and you're a doctor or whatever.
Right. Or they worked here in Teton Valley and they got into a workforce housing unit, but then they got a job in Jackson, so they're no longer locally employed.
Right.
So these are things that have to be worked through, and there will be some oversight and some certification that needs to be done on an annualized basis. But that's just part of the process of managing your affordable housing inventory. I'll give you an example. So in Placentia, where I was city administrator, we had redevelopment, which 20% of all redevelopment funds had to be set aside for affordable housing. So the city, through redevelopment, acquired a number of single family residences and put people into these residences when they met a certain income level, and then put a deed restriction on that unit so it could never be sold unless it was sold to a person meeting that same requirement.
I see.
Because these things are 30-year mortgages, somebody has to keep track of this. If you don't keep track of it, people take advantage of the system. So I had 5 of these 8 units that we had in this kind of low to moderate income housing bracket get sold without the city ever knowing they got sold.
Mm.
And then the new people living there obviously didn't meet the requirements. And so how do you go back and claw back the money from the people who previously lived there? Because the city, through tax funds, basically bought the property to subsidize the cost of the property so that these low to moderate income people could live in there. It's a real problem. And so we basically lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax revenue that we essentially used to buy property that no longer met the qualifications of the residents who are living in these properties. So if you don't have a very well-developed program and oversight that's managed on an annualized basis, you're going to have a similar problem. And so it really is something where the housing authority is going to have to play a significant role in making sure that the properties that are built using state, federal, local funds are maintained and kept in the categories that they're.
Who's watching that stuff now? You have 100 some units of affordable housing that are being occupied. Is there anyone babysitting this stuff? And
Well, fortunately, the ones that are currently developed is developed by a nonprofit housing builder,
okay,
Northwest Real Estate. So they do a very good job at making sure that the properties stay in the categories they need to stay in. Any departures, they will then go turn around and make sure that somebody who replaces the person living there is of that same category. So they do it for us, or do it for the city of Driggs, because that was built in conjunction with the city of Driggs. But for the projects that the housing authority is directly involved in, they're going to have to do it, or the cities where the properties are in, like Victor or in Driggs, cities are going to have to take up that effort. I think it'll ultimately end up with the housing authority, and the housing authority will have a contract with those cities or some relationship with the cities that have these projects in it to allow the housing authority to be the manager of those properties.
wow, so much bureaucracy and paperwork to keep track of. Thinking if someone becomes overqualified to live in one of these affordable housing units, I feel like you almost create a secondary problem. Now you have someone, let's say they're living here for 10 years or qualified, everything's good, and they get a $2,000 a year pay increase. And now they don't qualify. Now what does the county lose, or the community lose a seasoned worker here because slightly over? Like now where do they go? And like that was one of the pitfalls with the broad brushing this with the coal towns, was like you were trapped there. It was like,
Right.
indentured servitude or whatever. Like, we have you, you can't leave, you're kind of stuck here. Um,
There are a lot of unintended consequences in living in a subsidized housing unit. And I think we have yet to truly experience what those unintended consequences will mean and the impact they will have. But it will definitely be something that we're going to have to go in eyes wide open to figure out, because get a good example. Somebody who's working here locally got in at a certain time and then they get a bonus, and their employer doesn't really understand that that bonus may take them out of the income category that they were in when they qualified for that unit. They may no longer be eligible to be in that unit, and they may have to leave that unit. Like,
right.
obviously they'll be given time to leave the unit, but still it does have a number of unintended consequences that I don't think we've fully.
It's like the personal stagnation thing. I think most people inherently want to improve, maybe increase their salary, da da da. But I don't know how you make the leap from you're giving all your money to rent, right? These are all rentals for the most part.
There will be a for sale component with the
Okay,
New West, or Signal West rather.
gotcha.
But, the others are all basically rentals.
Right, so you're renting and you're putting all this money into rental. You're not getting anything other than a temporary roof over your head. Um, there's no upward mobility for you, right, to kind of get out of that situation. So I feel like it almost lends itself to transient workers, or I like the idea of people putting roots down in the community. And I feel bad, I know quite a few people who they've rented here for, let's say, from the year of 1999 up through the Great Cough. And when the Great Cough came around, the real estate market went nuts here. It's come down a little bit, but still unaffordable. And I'm kind of like, well, you lived here all that time, you were renting, and you kind of hemmed and hawed. Maybe you should have put some roots down in the community and really invested in the form of real estate here. And people have their reasons why they like to rent. I think a lot of it is, especially in the Intermountain West towns, it's the idea of flexibility. If a better opportunity pops up in Breckenridge, you're not saddled to a mortgage here and you can split. I mean, there's a lot of facets to this topic.
Clearly, and I'm truly much more conservative than a lot of my contemporaries in government. I mean, I understand that we have to be compassionate. We have to provide for some assistance for people who don't meet the income needs to rent a home or a apartment in areas, just so that they have a place to live, because we don't want a bunch of homeless people. But I don't know if government should be, especially local government, should be that directly involved in the provision of housing. I think there's other ways local government can be successful. For example, I've been pushing for an accessory dwelling unit um, program, where for people who have enough property to accommodate a ADU on their property, perhaps through either reduced permit fees or some level of support, including the possibility of construction loans at a zero or very low interest rate, we can help them build those ADUs and essentially accommodate somebody who certain income eligibility, and deed restrict those ADUs from ever being short-term vacation rentals
Right.
or being sold to somebody who makes a higher income. So that's kind of low-hanging fruit. We have a lot of people who have surplus land who could accommodate a separate ADU on their land.
I feel like the ADU is like a dirty word,
It
though,
is.
whether it's in an HOA situation, which have their own rules, but the county, it's like ADU, and it's like you just ask them for a third kidney.
Yeah, I know. But it is something that I think would provide a lot of
I
inventory.
agree.
And we just have to overcome this stigma that ADUs are bad. I mean, in Idaho, you cannot prohibit ADUs. You can regulate them, you can put certain requirements on them, but you can't prohibit. So even an HOA, if CCNRs say you can't prevent an ADU if they were amended or drafted after 2023, you have to allow for an ADU. It still has to go through the county or the city's zoning and land use regulations, but you can't just outright prohibit. So to me, that's a easy way to provide some housing for our workforce and people who need housing. But to build a massive townhome or apartment project, which is going to run tens of millions of dollars, the only way a developer is going to want to come in and do that is if they get the land for free or heavily subsidized, and then they get assistance either through fee abatement, expedited, streamlined zoning and permitting, or they get money from the state or federal government to basically build the project. Otherwise, it's not a profitable
Right.
thing to do. And most developers, unless they're a nonprofit and that's kind of their mission or
Just
mandate,
philanthropy.
yeah, they're not going to come in and do that. So it's really a problem that I think needs to be dealt with on the federal level. And I think some of the things that the Trump administration is talking about, like portable mortgages, where you can take your mortgage with you. So if you have a 3% mortgage and you want to go and buy a new house, but it's going to be 3 times the price of the house that you're living in, and you have a 3% mortgage, well, then you should be able to take your mortgage with you.
Right.
Those are the kind of things that I think need to be addressed from a federal level so that we have more tools in the tool chest to basically deal with this whole problem of not only housing
We have
supply.
that right now, right? People bought houses in 2020 and 2021. The mortgage rates were very favorable, and they're kind of sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. And by them sitting there waiting in what used to be a starter home of sorts, there's an entire group of people that can't get into those homes, and there's no opportunity for leapfrogging. I mean, locally, I look at I wasn't not born and raised here. I moved here and developed my own piece of property, but I look at, the next generation of people who were born and raised here. Where do they go? And the county now, you know, holds most of the land mass here. They've made it almost impossible for the family to split off a piece of property, which was kind of their traditional avenue, unless the idea of living like Little House on a Prairie, where we have 5 generations under one roof, that's kind of faded in popularity. Do you think that there's any chance of the zoning? I mean, you hear talk about zoning being changed or reverted or some carve out for the heritage farming family. Do you think that's ever going to happen here? I feel like as soon as that hits the airwaves, that, oh yeah, they're even thinking about that, there's going to be a riot.
Yeah, I've heard similar rumors about work being done to possibly turn the land development code to its former state,
Oh,
or to provide for some flexibility.
start buying plywood for your business front windows
Yeah,
now.
exactly. I'm not sure if that's ever going to go anywhere. I think there is a very um, strong group of people who came into this valley in the 80s who want to keep Teton Valley in the 80s and don't want to see any further development. And so I think that's going to be very difficult to make those kind of changes to allow for more flexibility. And frankly, I mean, I think all of us came here for the peaceful enjoyment of our property, and we don't want this to become a suburb of Rexburg.
Right? Nobody came here and said, "I'm going to build a windowless building and live under a blanket." We surrounded by beauty in every direction here.
I mean, we do need to provide for housing because if we don't, we're going to die as a community with no services, no businesses to provide for the people who live here because they need a workforce. And people are not going to want to drive 40, 50, or even further miles in a driving snowstorm to come to work.
Right.
So we need to do something, and I think we're trying to do something. But the question is, I've given you the numbers. We're far from achieving our 2027 goal, let alone our 2030 goal.
Right. I mean, at the current rate, you're 30 years out
how,
from.
how do how do we get there, and what's the quickest way to get there? I think it's going to be kind of an all options approach. We're going
I
to
feel
have
like the ADU idea is probably one of the most workable. It kind of keeps it a private, semi-government partnership. Government only, maybe alleviating some of the fees or cutting some of the red tape. I mean, there's a lot of opposition. Anytime you mention we want to build townhouses or condos, I mean, people are like hair on fire over my dead body. Are we doing that? But I mean, to be able to get the numbers that the housing authority is talking about, you have to build denser housing. I
yeah,
mean, over time, you could get the ADU program going, but it's to your point about people are stagnating and they still think it's 1983, and that kills me when people get up to the microphone at public meetings and they give out their resume of how they live. I moved here, July 13th, 1983, and blah blah blah, and then they say when we moved here, there was all kinds of wildlife on our property, and now that the people that have the lot next to us built, we don't see the animals anymore. And I kind of look at them, I'm like, who do you think was living on your property before you stuck a shovel in the ground? Like,
exactly.
I have probably an unpopular idea of what a developer is. To me, a developer is anyone that does anything to the ground, whether it's pound a fence post in or if you alter the landscape. You might be a tiny developer, I'm not saying that we're all building steel mills or lumber mills out here, but that gatekeeping kills me. I mean, the Northern Lights subdivision finally made it through with some caveats attached to it, but that's just a mile or so north here, and I look at some of the people that spoke out against that project, and I'm just like, gosh, like you weren't born and raised here. Now you're stopping, this family that's had roots in this valley for 100 plus years from doing something with their property. Yeah, I don't know if we'll ever get rid of that NIMBY. I think we have a problem far worse than the NIMBY thing. NIMBY, I always thought growing up in, my eighth grade earth science class was you don't want the chemical factory being built in your
Right.
backyard. That I get, and I would still take the side of the original, person that's going to have to live next to this. Or, like Fall River's asking for this rezone to build a subdivision, or excuse me, a substation. I can understand why people don't want to live next to a substation. Um, but when it's straight residential development, I have a hard time with the people hollering from the rooftops about that.
Because at one point in time, they had to build their house,
Yeah,
and they obviously got in when they got in, and to just keep it the way it's been since they bought in, I think is realistic.
right,
People have the constitutional right to the personal enjoyment of their property.
right,
They're able to be able to build on the property as long as it follows county or city zoning and other requirements. But to just outright tell a property owner you can't build anything there because you're going to scare the animals away, or you're going to somehow limit my view from the south side of my property.
yep.
You're not guaranteed view. You're not guaranteed animals on your property. Uh,
I know of one project where someone got up and spoke and said, the view from my back deck will be obscured if you build these houses here. So I was curious. I went and drove down on the public roads and I looked. I'm like, they don't have a deck on the back of their house. And by my look, they have some kind of 15-foot high fence in their backyard. They have no view of the subject parcel anyway. But people get up there and they can just say whatever they want, basically. And I'm like, that's not true. I wish there was some mandatory requirement for anyone that's planning and zoning or an elected official that's in the position to make these decisions. They had to go do a site visit, even if it was just a site visit from the public right away, just to see with their own eyes. Because I watched the decision making process, and I'm like, have you ever even gone and looked at this property on a map or in real life? And I think the answer is no.
Yeah, no, I think and technology certainly allows us to do 3D renderings from any vantage point on anybody's property to kind of give the decision makers a bird's eye perspective of how that property is going to be perceived and how their view is going to be affected. So I think we're just not both government agencies who have to make these decisions and the public are not taking advantage of the technologies that we have to make these projects look how they're going to be when they're developed. And I think we need to stop with the emotional arguments and rely on the data, rely on the facts. I've seen too many of these projects go through the cities in the county here defeated because of emotional reactions versus fact-based information.
Right. Whoever screams the loudest gets their decision. It gets made in their
Sure.
favor. Um, Wow. Well, we've covered a lot today, a lot to think about here. I'm sure that this conversation is not going to go away. This is going to be in perpetuity here, I think, in Teton County. I'll give you the final word. Is there anything else you want to add to this caldera of?
Well, I think the call to action is now. I think we need to start really worrying about our lack of housing for our workforce in particular, because if we don't deal with it now, we're going to reach a crisis point where a lot of our businesses, and we even saw this during COVID, a lot of our businesses didn't have access to workers, so they had to close. They basically had to shut their doors down early or begin later in the day. And I just think if we continue down the path we're on and we don't account for the need for workforce housing for our essential workers like sheriff's deputies, fire personnel, hospital workers, teachers, administrators, city workers, we are going to find ourselves in a workforce deficit, and that's going to be detrimental, and it will ultimately lead to having to pay a lot more to bring in people from the outside, which means that directly relates to the cost of what people have to pay in taxes to support that additional.
Or $60 pizzas.
Or $60 pizzas, as you said. Yeah. So we have time, but we need to act soon. If we wait, it'll become a crisis, and then we won't have the ability to essentially make up for the shortages that we have in our housing.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Well, Troy, thank you again for coming on and spending some time talking about this. I hope we can get you back on again as things sort of evolve here, if you will. Thank you all for listening. That's all for today. Remember, if you'd like to contact us or if you'd like to be a guest on the show or share an idea or a topic, you may do so by emailing us at the isacclemensshow@gmail.com. Don't forget to give us a follow, and please turn on the notifications on the Rumble app so you don't miss an episode. Stay safe and have a great day.